lounging, son.
All right, welcome back to the Comic Lounge. My name's Ryan, and with me today I have Christopher Williams for another episode of Indie Creator Spotlight. I'm super stoked to have you on, dude. I've been a fan of yours for a little while now. I've been like following you on social media and stuff like that, so I'm really glad we could finally lock down a time to get you on and talk some comics, man.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure, dude. I always ask everybody, it's something I do every time, what started your love for comics? How did you first get into comics as a fan?
I've got a cousin who's a couple years older than me, and he was when I was coming up. I was born in 1980. He was born, I think, around 74, 75. And so he was already into Star Wars and G.I. Joe and Transformers and everything, like right at the beginning of all that. And so when I would go and see him and hang out with him, I immediately got into all that, and comics was one of those things. And so we would go and visit with them, and we would always go to whatever comic book shop he was going to at the time. And yeah, one of my earliest memories with comics, or maybe my earliest, is sitting down at the table at his house, having come back from the comic book store, and I had the Marvel Tales with Peter Porker, the Spectacular Spider-Ham, and I just remember going through that over and over again, and then getting out the paper and sitting there and tracing over everything and trying to learn how to draw Spider-Ham. And so yeah, it was from there. And then I was at that age that the Image Comics boom and all that in the 90s, that hit me at just the right time. So I had my pull box, and I go into the store every week. My grandmother would take me to the store every week, and I would get a nice stack of comics. And so yeah, just quickly accumulated several boxes worth. But
yeah, I was a little bit younger when Image started, so I didn't I got into them later. But yeah, I mean, that is the perfect age for to experience all that stuff. I'm kind of curious, what were since you were there for the beginning of Image, what were some of your favorite Image titles in the initial launch?
I have multiple number ones because it was also the speculator boom and all that. So yeah, I've got Spawn #1 and Youngblood #1 and Youngblood 0, I think, and Savage Dragon and Shadowhawk. But I think probably my favorite was Spawn, because I remember for my birthday in 5th grade, a friend of mine got me a subscription to the Todd McFarlane Spider-Man comic, just the adjectiveless Spider-Man comic, and that started on, I think, issue 8 or 9. It was the crossover with Wolverine and Wendigo. And I had never seen Todd McFarlane's work before, and it blew me away. And so I remember when we were on vacation in Myrtle Beach, having to track down a comic book store down there so I could get a copy of Spawn #1. And yeah, no, I it was super dark, but I think that going from I had collected some back issues by the time Spawn came out, and so I was whatever 11 or something at the time, but going back over and seeing how it went from amazing to the just standard Spider-Man book, and just kind of kept getting darker, and then into Spawn, it was I was sort of prepared for it to be really dark. I mean, so some of the stuff I wasn't quite so prepared for, and probably didn't understand totally at that age, but yeah.
No, that was I mean, I love 90s comics. I know there's people that have their opinions on it, but sometimes you hear those opinions and it's were you even around for that era of comics? Because it is a younger generation. Sometimes it's oh, there's nothing good from the 90s, and I think that's so far from the truth, in my opinion.
Well, and that's I was talking, there's at the store that I used to go to growing up over in Greensboro, North Carolina, Parts Unknown. The guy who runs that store, John Hitchcock, who I think he was on they talked about him on Cartoonist Kayfabe recently because he was friends with Alex Toth. I was talking to him years ago about the Image Comics boom, and I said, kind of cynically, it's like, how did you feel about that? I mean, it was that was pretty terrible, right? And he just goes, yeah, but you bought it. It's like, yeah, you're right, I did, and
Yeah.
I liked it a lot.
Yeah.
So I can only say so much about it. It was yeah, no, and really, with it hitting when it did, I remember my friends and I going through X Force and Youngblood and trying to emulate. Like, I can still do like little shading techniques that Rob Liefeld did, and like the little like cross hatching on the eyes and stuff. Like, I still remember how to do that because when I was that age, I learned like this is the way that you draw a face, and I went from the how to draw comics the Marvel way to like, oh well, this is that's very rounded, and this is much more like scattershot, real sketchy, and I like this a lot more. And so yeah, I really dug all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like obviously, like I said, I was young, but like just even going back and reading like older comics, I can put myself in that headspace of like watching the jump from like that specific style that you were used to, and then you see all these like newer artists coming in and like doing some like crazy shit, like the noodling that McFarlane does, or the crazy cross hatching, and
Yeah,
Eric Larson stuff. I kind of prefer his Spider-Man a little bit more than McFarlane, if I'm being honest.
yeah.
But I mean, and that's not to say I don't love Todd's Spider-Man, but I love that era of Eric Larson and what he did on Amazing, and then following it up with like, going to adjectiveless Spider-Man as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, just such a crazy time artistically in comics. And like I think it really helps push the medium in a different way, because you could do
Mhm.
so, because there's stuff you can do in comics you can't do in any other, you can't do it in film, you can't do it in TV, like those distinct styles, and like not
Yeah.
following anatomy to me is like, I like that. I don't need it to be perfect anatomically correct, that doesn't mean anything to me. But so now that like you talk about like as a kid, like you're tracing and stuff, when did you kind of decide that like maybe this is something you kind of want to pursue in terms of making your own comic books?
Well, I wanted to do it in that like the grade school sort of way, and like had a comic book a group with me and my friends. I think it was called like Cowabunga Comics or something. We all had our characters that the derivative of Wolverine and the derivative of Batman, and all that. But yeah, so eventually I got more into music and things like that in high school, and got out of comics for a long time. And then my senior year of college, before I started my senior year, a friend of mine who's still a professor up at Appalachian State, Craig Fisher, he told me in the spring of 2002 I'm going to do a graphic novels class. So if it's a shame you're not going to be around, because I was going to graduate early. And I was like, well, you know what, if I take the bare minimum of hours, then I can actually stretch into that spring and take that class. And so I did that. And that class, like through that class, I already knew about Mike Allred. I'd been a big fan of Madman, and would, even though I wasn't following comics, I would still like occasionally dip in and get whatever Madman was out. But it was through that class that I found out about Love and Rockets. Craig told me, there's these brothers that have done a book for a long time. I think you would really dig it. And he had the collections, and he started passing them off to me every week in class. And I read through the initial run over a couple weeks probably. And so yeah, it was then that I decided that I wanted to do it. Applied for a Xeric grant out of college, didn't get it, then kind of dropped the idea of it until I was going through a particularly bad bout of depression a couple of years ago, back in 2018. And I was doing I've done concert posters for a long time, gig posters, and screen printing them in my house. And I would go to comic conventions and sell them, and I kind of always felt like a fraud because I'm showing up at a comic convention, I don't have any comics. And so for one of the shows, I decided, well, I'm just going to do a zine and see how that does. and people seemed to like it. And so I turned that zine into 3 graphic novel arc. And then, yeah, ever since then, I've just been working on sequential work pretty much every day. And so since 2019. And it helped with the main part of it was that it helped me process a lot of the depression that I was going through. And so I was able to work on something and have like some sort of structure and just kind of get that out on the page. And so yeah, it's mainly been for what, I guess the last 5 years, 4 years, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, just the stuff that I have from you, I think this stuff, the earliest I have is 2020
Okay, yeah.
for your work. But yeah, like obviously, like I would imagine the pandemic gave you a lot of time as well. I mean, I don't know how
Yeah.
the pandemic was for you. Like I was out of work for a while, and then even when I went back to work, it was like very scaled back.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, look, I mean, you have this book, Radio, Petrillo. You got this Back in Time, which is kind of riff on Back to the Future, which is
Yeah.
one of my favorite movies, and Artifact. And there's something that I like. I think is a through line in your work is like it's very atmospheric. I think like that's you do a lot of. There's a lot of wordless like panels and pages in your work,
Mhm.
which I really like because you kind of allow the reader to interpret it in their own way. And
Mhm.
obviously, like you have a way that your intention, right? But like you can interpret it in multiple ways. So when you're coming up with a new project, like what is your process in terms of when you're going to do a new project? Like how does it start? Does it start with like you just draw something out? Are you writing scripts for yourself? What are the topics you kind of like to cover? Because like you said, you kind of you work through, and I can see that like you're working through
Mhm.
stuff that's kind of going on within yourself.
Yeah, I usually just kind of slowly start formulating an idea. I say slowly, and I'm looking at the list of books I've got above my computer. I've got a list of all the books that I've finished, and between graphic novels and zines and a poetry book that I put together for someone and a book of poetry, I've got like I think I'm about to put out my 46th book. Um, so yeah, it feels slow, the development, but I guess it's relatively fast. I just sort of start kind of coming up with some sort of idea, some sort of nugget for Back in Time. It was after years of having discussions about like, well, would Back to the Future work? It's cool that when he comes back that it's Lone Pine Mall instead of Twin Pines Mall, but does that really work? And wouldn't it just be a time loop? And how things like that. And so just starting to pull it apart. And Radio, I think you mentioned that was just trying to figure out. I have a 15-year-old son, and thinking about or watching him growing up and thinking like, well, when I was like 12 years old, like what would I say to if I had the chance to speak to myself at 40, like what would I say? What would I do? Like would I come off as really cynical or really dark? Like, well, because of the things that have changed me, and then trying to figure out like, well, how could I, not to blow the entire plot of Radio, but it's one person over 3 points in their life coming together and interacting and seeing the way that time has changed that person. And so like just trying to pull that apart and seeing where it goes from there, and then trying to figure out another thing that I try to do with trying to keep it more visual is that I a lot of the comics that I got when I was growing up, I didn't necessarily read them because they were super dense, and uh, so I tried to study the way that the images were laid out and what sort of story the images told, and so I try to rely more on that. So yeah, I'll go through and have an idea for where I want the story to go, try to plot out panels that will maybe reference other panels or similar layouts from chapter to chapter. And then once I'm all finished with the art, and I'll make notes from time to time as I'm going through of like specific dialogue that I think will be good. But then it's once I've finished doing all the art that I actually go back and I begin scripting the entire thing. And usually I'll have like an introductory line or something like that, and to kind of tee off of. But yeah, it's not until I finish that I actually start putting the words in, and then seeing like how much I actually need to rely on the words, or how much I can actually like focus on just using the art to tell the story.
Yeah, I like that because I totally hear you on the super dense of
Yeah.
some comics from a certain era. Like, especially like if you read Silver Age, sometimes it's
Yeah.
like there's just so much text, and like I feel like sometimes I, not to take away from the writer, because I love comic book writers, you know what I mean?
Mm,
Like, and I think, but it is a visual medium. So when you see these like walls of text, you almost feel like you're taking away from the art. To me, I think there should be like that perfect balance,
yeah.
like where you let the artist kind of tell the story visually, but then you also, have not walls of text. I don't want to see where it's like half the panel is text and then the bottom half just like
Yeah.
a straight wall, like that drives me nuts. So I like being able to interpret it visually, because I think
Mm,
that, I recently read like Daniel Warren Johnson's taking over Transformers, right? So they released an ash can at San Diego, but there's no words in it. But it
oh,
reads fine, like they
nice.
did the black and white art, it's obviously a preview of issue 1, but like being able to interpret it visually, like I kind of already, you can see what's happening, right? Like you can kind
Yeah.
of put the words in their mouth to a certain extent, and then like later, getting to compare that will be kind of cool as well. I think radio, definitely, of the 4 books that I showed you, is definitely the most interesting, I think, in terms of like the concept, because like, yeah, what do you say? Would you say to yourself? Like I think about it sometimes, like, man, like I remember being a kid and like I definitely didn't think life was this, or
Yeah.
like this is how life would turn out in terms of like the responsibility you have, right? Like you're so carefree as a kid and you're just like,
Yeah.
all I cared about was like, what comic book am I gonna get this week?
Right.
It was like that. It's so simple, And yeah, like, and then just thinking about like, okay, where will I be 15 years from now, 20 years from now, 25 years from now, and what would that person say to this version of
Yeah.
myself? So I think that concept is very, very interesting. And did you learn kind of anything? Were you putting yourself in that headspace of like, obviously, like you could talk to your younger self, right? But did you think about also your older self and what your older self might say to this version of you?
Yeah. It was, I don't know. From my full-time job is that I'm a graphic designer for a design and marketing firm. And it was one of those things that I think about, well, I'm a graphic designer, but I'm not a full-time artist, and getting down on myself. And then to like work on that book and to have a moment where I think about it, like, well, no, if my 10-year-old self got to talk to me, it's like, well, so I'm a graphic designer full-time. I've been making gig posters freelance. I've made over 1,000 gig posters in 20 years. And now I've been doing art, or I'm making sequential art for 4 or 5 years. Yeah, no, that's pretty cool. Like that's yeah, it's okay. Like as
Mhm.
much as I want to get down on myself, it's like, no, that would be pretty cool to 10-year-old me. Like, oh yeah, you get to make art all the time. Wow, that sounds pretty all right.
Yeah. And then I want to talk about artifacts. Can you kind of
Yeah.
talk about the idea behind that book? Because I mean, from what I'm getting, like she creates the character Mira creates her art, right, with her prints,
Yeah.
but she can also enter
Mhm.
into the, so I really was curious like about the idea behind that book and kind of where it came from.
That was from an idea that I had years ago about making the gig posters, and the idea of like, well, I'm creating this world, but it's not it's, I mean, much like a comic, it's a world that doesn't exist. But as opposed to something like a comic where it can be laid out over a series of panels and you can explore that world, and you can do it in one issue, you can do it in 100 issues, whatever, you can really go into depth. I'm creating a world in a poster that exists for one poster and nowhere else. And I just kind of thought, what would it be like to be able to actually see more of this world and to do something with it if I could interact with it. And so yeah, it was that, and the idea of kind of feeling lost and pretty lonely. And if I was able to go in, create friends or create a I don't know, something warm within this other place, like would I actually escape into that world, or would I be happy with what I have? And whether or not that escape would actually prove worth it, or if it would just lead to doing that over and over and over again to no real end.
And is that why you chose to like signify that by like when she's in the world, regular world, it's black and white, right?
Yeah.
But then when she's in
Yeah.
the painting, it's color, like it's like a
Yeah.
happier kind of energy. I thought that was an interesting choice as well.
Oh, thanks. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's I usually do black and white. I just finished up. I might have finished a new graphic novel last week, that I'm doing a similar thing with using a lot of color. And that I'd forgotten, since I worked on Artifact, that and back in time, that like doing color means a lot more work. So it's like I would finish a page and like, oh yeah, now I need to go back and add color to it. It's like, oh god, this takes twice as long. Ugh. But yeah.
And you do it all traditionally, right? So are you doing like an ink? No.
No, I do everything digitally, because I for the first things that I worked on, I was doing traditional. And so I would do blue line, pencil, then inks, and then I would go scan it all in and do spot blacks that way, in Photoshop. But my patience runs very, very thin. And I found a graphic novel that I had done all the pencil work for back from like 20 years ago. It was I had like 75 pages. And yeah, so it was all the pencil work, all the dialogue, and I had inked 1.5 pages before I was like, nah. And just it's in a box in the other room, that it's like, yeah, I'm never gonna finish this now. And
You should
so
scan it in, and finish it digitally, man. Come on, dude. 75 pages? That's a lot of work to just
yeah.
leave in a box, man.
Oh yeah. But with the iPad, I've it works much faster for me. I can do the blue line for all the pages. I do blue line, like layout and detailed work, and then go back over all of it. But I don't have to. I don't know. It's practically the same amount of work, but it tricks me enough that it's like, oh no, it's not the same amount of work, that I'm like, oh okay, this is much faster. And it's like, nah, it's probably just as slow as the other way as it would be for me. But yeah.
Yeah, and I forgot, I wanted to ask too, like artistically, I mean, you kind of mentioned some of the books that you were following, but were there any artists that you kind of draw from for inspiration, even now, like newer artists that are coming out? Who are some of those artists for you that really kind of get your creative juices going?
Well, I've got a stack right here next to my desk. Let me grab that. Hold on. So the Marco Cicchetto that did the Daredevil series. Like I really liked there are Tilly Walden.
He's awesome.
Yeah. Gabriel Bell. And these are both in art and story that I really, it's like I kind of hone in on. Tula Late, the Barnstormers book. Yeah. Here's a old the Guy Davis Sandman Mystery Theater.
I just read that for the first time. The
Oh, it's great.
compendium.
It's great
I'm so
stuff.
mad I have to wait for the second half of that
Yeah,
series now.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Noah Van Sciver, Tori Holder. Let's see. Macy from Know Nothing. I just, this is a really, I really awesome zine called Half Birthday that I love and I've read several times over. Let's see. Kayla E's Precious Rubbish. That Fantagraphics is going to be putting out, I think, next year, maybe. But yeah, I just like I don't know. When I yeah when I have a moment and I kind of feel lost, then I can kind of go through all that and sort of, and I mean they're wildly different styles throughout all of that, but there's something about it that I can kind of pull from, and also that a lot of my more recent stuff is more I don't know, compared to something like radio, it's much more I don't know if this will show up, but
Oh yeah.
much more sort of realistic. And so I've been finally giving in to the fact that my mom's favorite artist is or was Norman Rockwell, and so Norman Rockwell was always around our house growing up, and I've finally given in to the fact that I probably draw a lot of inspiration from Norman Rockwell. So yeah, I just kind of pull all that together and
Mash
work
it
from
up. Yeah,
there.
dude, for
Yeah.
sure. So I have 4 books. You said 46. So that's a lot
Yeah.
of books, especially in 5 years. So I got a lot of catching up to do for sure. But how fast does it take you to do a book then if you're doing that much? Do you draw every single day? Are you constantly just working on a new project?
Yeah, I haven't I think this morning was the first time in we went on vacation last week, and so this morning was the first morning that I actually started working on sequential stuff again, and it had been about a week and a half, and uh and that's I think the longest break that I've taken in 5 years. I usually do, or whatever, how many years? I lost track of, but the yeah, I get up every morning and I'll have coffee and breakfast, and then until it's time for me to start work for the day, then I'll just work on pages, and I can usually get at least one page done a day. um Sometimes I've been able to do like 2 or 3 pages a day, and so yeah, usually when I get really into a book and I'm working, then like I think the new book is about 140 pages, and it probably took me something like 150 days or something to do it. So
Can you talk about the new book, the one that you're currently working on, and kind of
yeah.
when it's coming out, stuff like that?
Yeah, it's called I Lived in the Clouds, and it's just the story of a woman that lives with her father, and she is a suicide survivor. He's a survivor of a car crash that took his wife. He As a result of the accident, he suffers memory loss, severe memory loss, and so it's about them trying to find a way to connect and trying to find a way to live beyond circumstances that they probably shouldn't have lived. So yeah, and with I'm using a lot of color in that to there's those mood charts that you can do, like going through every day, and like a different color means a different mood that you're in. And so I started using that. I was using it for myself and integrated that into the book to just sort of the kind of go through the moods and how things change, and how even though things might seem very dark, like they're, if you pay attention, if you look, even though it can be incredibly hard to do, uh there is a lot to be very happy about and very thankful for in the world. And so the more that they kind of explore that, and the more that they're able to connect, and they're sort of like the Wizard of Oz, more and more color comes into it. And yeah.
Very cool concept. Yeah, I like that, dude. And when can we expect that book? Like where can people get it to?
I through my website, plasticflame.com. and I'm hoping that it should be like all ready to ship and all that at the end of September.
Very cool, dude.
Mm.
I want to ask you too. You mentioned Spider-Ham. I know you
Yeah,
did like a grand design type Spider-Ham book that, yeah, I need to
yeah.
get that. Are you selling that book?
No, I'm not selling this book. I am
Damn it.
I made some screen prints of a of this page. I made screen prints of Spider-Ham fighting Vinham, and if you purchased the print, then I sent you this free fan comic. So
Okay.
so
So if you
yeah,
want the fan comic, you
yeah,
need
yeah,
to get the print. Okay, good to
yeah,
know because I
yeah. I
want
think yeah, no, I have I think I had maybe a handful of copies left, and so I might do another run of those. But yeah, that was a lot of fun.
yeah, that's
So
something that when I saw, I'm like, man, I really want to like do an overhead like review of that book. I got to see it because like I love fan comics. I love when you get to see kind of your creators do their own riff on stuff. Like Monty Keene did that, that Spider-Man bootleg comic.
mhm.
I always think those are fun, getting to see people that you don't think you'd see, or maybe don't even have the desire to go work for those publishers, but just want to kind of do their own thing. I think that's pretty
Yeah.
awesome. So why is it because of that original interaction with it as a kid that made you want to do this fan comic?
Yeah, yeah, it was that was part of it, and it was several years ago that after we had done, I think it was after my son and I came back from the first Heroes Con that we did, and uh, uh, X-Men Grand Design had already come out, and I was talking to my son about that, and I just said, if Marvel runs with the concept, eventually they're going to have to do Spider-Ham, right? And then looking back over a lot of Spider-Ham's history, and there's no like, I mean, most characters, there's no real through line to anything. I mean, like, through the grand design stuff, they've done a really good job of like, here's a way to connect all the stories in a linear fashion. But for Spider-Ham, like there's so many different versions of all of the villains, and like even Spider-Ham's origin differs from book to book. So I say, well, what if I just took the grand design concept, and instead of like stringing together all these things into a linear story, I just made up a bunch of stuff that happened to Spider-Ham and that doesn't make any sense and doesn't really go together. And we just sort of, yeah, just put that into a book. And so yeah, and actually that probably took me longer to do than some of my graphic novels, just because I mean it's only 28 pages, but because of I tried to keep it to the Spider-Ham style as
Mm-hmm.
much as possible. So yeah, it's just a totally different style than I'm used to drawing. And so I would get through with the page. I'm like, no, that doesn't look right. I've got like, this is wrong, this curve is off, and having to go back through and revise the pages over and over again, more than I have to do for, whatever 120 page book. But
Is it something you would ever do again in terms of like doing another fan comic? Do you have any other ideas that you'd want to do?
yeah, well, yeah, you were saying Sandman Mystery Theater, like yeah, I've talked to someone about the possibility of at some point doing that. They would script, and I would draw yeah, that I would absolutely do a Sandman Mystery Theater fan comic in a heartbeat.
That would
But
be dope.
yeah, yeah.
And so, besides the current graphic novel that you're currently working on, kind of, do you already know what you're doing next? Kind of, and the con circuit. Like I know you said, like you originally went to the con, you felt like a fraud, or not a fraud. I don't know if you use the word fraud, but like that you
Oh
didn't have
yeah,
any comics, but like now, like you have a ton. So
yeah.
what's next on the horizon for you?
Yeah, I've got another. I'm working on another shorter book right now that I'm trying to do. It's a little more challenging because I'm trying to do it all in spreads rather than single pages, and to make it so the art just sort of most of my stuff. I usually rely on a three panel page, and I'm trying to for this to not do that at all, not use panels for most of the book at all. And so I'm working on that, and then we have there's a couple conventions that I think we're waiting to hear back from through the end of the year, and then but yeah, part of it is too that I'm also in a band, Maple Stave, that we just our album releases this weekend, and so we're doing a tour in September for that, and so that kind of that's going to mess with drawing, which that just hit me that I might not be able to draw for like a week and a half. And I'm like, that's going to suck. but I'll be playing music, and that'll be fun. So
yeah, how do you balance that? You have a full-time job as a graphic designer, you're doing your comics, and you do music. How's that something? I mean, that's a full load right there, man.
And I have a 15-year-old.
And you have a child. Yeah, I know I know that, dude. I have my daughter's 8, so
I was gonna say,
I totally understand that, man.
Yeah. No, I just I don't like sitting still for too long. If I don't have work to do, if I've done like a page or something that day, and I don't feel like I have it in me to do another page, and I'm done with work, and I don't have band practice, then I'm not going to sit here and watch a movie. I'll sit here and listen to a podcast, and I'll do a drawing. I have to be doing something. Yeah, so I just kind of keep at it, and I don't know, I guess out of some fear that one day I'll get up and I just won't have any ideas, and that'll be it. Like someone turned off a light switch. I'm like, well, all right, I guess I'm done with doing art forever.
Well, I hope that day doesn't come anytime soon, man. I love your stuff. Obviously I have a lot more to get through and pick up from you. I'm excited for, like the new project that you said is going to be dropping soon. I'll drop all the links for everything where people can find you online down below. I want to thank you so much for taking time to chat with me, dude. And I'd love to do this with you again sometime. Maybe throw in a creator commentary, do an overhead with one of your books. If you'd be down for that, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, dude, it's my pleasure. I can't wait to have you on again, dude.
Thanks.